Below the surface of The Amazing Spider-Man 2's abundance of plots and villains lays a narrative through line that is surprisingly really profound. The main sort of antagonistic force that Spider-Man works against in his movies is rarely the main villain, and if it is, they are usually tied to a greater theme, which is something that we everyday people in day-to-day life can relate to in some form. With 2002's Spider-Man 1, it was the natural growing pains of a young man, something I think many of us can relate to. With Spider-Man 2, it was juggling your responsibilities and your personal relationships. With Spider-Man 3, it was ego and hubris. With The Amazing Spider-Man, it was all about finding one's identity. With Spider-Man Homecoming, it was all about class distinction. With Spider-Man Far From Home, it was all about false information. And with Into the Spider-Verse, it was all about living up to expectations. These themes really help to reinforce the message that Spider-Man could be any of us. Because while we have those big, wonderful, over-the-top action sequences of him fighting nefarious villains, we have Peter Parker facing the kind of problems that we will face in day-to-day life. The kind of problems that spinning webs and crawling walls can't fix. And The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is no exception to this, as the main things working against Peter Parker in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 are not the Green Goblin and Electro, but instead, the narrative through line focuses on Peter Parker's battle with time. Now, I think it's pretty known by now that time is a theme in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but in this video, I just want to talk about the good job that Marc Webb does of depicting Spider-Man's battle with time. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 follows a set of different stories and perspectives, and time is a presence in each and every one. You've got Peter Parker trying to decide the fate of his relationship with Gwen Stacy when she's going to be moving to Oxford for her scholarship. You've got Harry Osborn working against the clock to find a cure for his disease which killed his father and is going to kill him. And with every moment and every sequence that comes with this, time is present. Now, you could say that about any film, like, naturally time goes by, but this film really focuses on that. Obviously, the opening shot of this film is Richard Parker's watch, and then in that opening sequence, we've got Richard Parker fighting against the clock to upload his research before the plane that he's on goes down. We've got Spider-Man battling against Alexei Sitsevich and trying to get to his graduation on time, where Gwen Stacy gives a speech about how time is luck. Electro's story does seem to be a bit of an exception to this rule though, which adds to him feeling a bit out of place in this movie. However, they do try to find ways of weaving time into his story as well. While his characterization is really just a guy on a quest for validation going bad, to further reinforce that time is always present, the first battle with Electro takes place in Times Square. And then in the last battle with Electro, he shuts off the power to New York City, putting hospital patients and flights in danger. So Spider-Man has to effectively restore power to New York City before everybody dies. And to further reinforce the looming presence of time, we're shown the pilots and everybody getting their stopwatches out. Before Spidey's last battle with Electro, we see the clock strike. It is in the third act of the film that time becomes more and more of a presence, and the battle against time becomes more and more intense. Time is up for Peter to save Harry because he's already taken matters into his own hands and become the Green Goblin. Time is running out for Peter to determine the fate of his relationship with Gwen Stacy because she's already in the taxi. And this is where it all culminates. After murdering Electro, Spider-Man says to Gwen Stacy that he thinks they can still make her flight. But then just as it looks like time has finally let up a little bit, the Green Goblin arrives and brings the fight to a clock tower. Gwen Stacy is dangling by a web thread that could be cut by the cogs of the clock tower at any second. The film constantly cuts to different shots of Peter trying to stop the cogs from moving, while trying to keep the Green Goblin at bay. We get shots of the minute hand constantly moving. We've got the booming, echoey sound of the clock tower ticking. Spider-Man is doing everything he can to jam those cogs. He's not so much fighting against the Green Goblin, he's trying to stop time itself. That may not be what's literally going on, but that is the thematic meaning of the scene. The entire film, Spider-Man has been trying to make decisions with very little time to do so, and he's now in a situation where the clock just won't stop ticking, and it's happening all around him. But now, if the cogs tick too far, Gwen Stacy is going to drop. At the same time, he needs those cogs to tick in order to defeat the Green Goblin. Eventually, he jams the cogs just enough in order to destroy the structure. But no, he doesn't defeat time. Instead, we get a shot of the clock hands ticking faster and faster and faster. The mechanism has been destroyed, they are now moving just out of sheer momentum. momentum. And of course, Gwen Stacy drops, and this is where she dies. He tried to stop time, he couldn't stop it, and with that, it moved faster and more violently than ever before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the battle is over. We have the sequence at Gwen Stacy's funeral, and no, given the time frame, it doesn't really make any sense. However, I do appreciate the thematic meaning of this scene. We have Peter standing by Gwen Stacy's grave through different seasons, because what this represents is that time is still there. Peter Parker couldn't stop it because nobody could. Even after the one you love is dead and gone, time will keep moving. It will always be there. It is unrelenting. It makes no compromises. But then after this, we are shown how time can heal you. And with that, the theme of time becomes one of the most complex characters in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And the way that Marc Webb depicts this is really kind of wonderful. Now, I know that this sounds like I'm really just gushing over The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because of its handling of the theme of time. Now, let me make one thing clear. I still consider this to be the worst Spider-Man film. While I think Marc Webb does a really good job at making time feel like a presence throughout the entire film and making it feel legitimately scary at times, obviously Electro really desperately tries to have a place in that narrative that he just can't quite reach, and there is a lack of attention to detail in the individual stories that service the theme of time. I've talked about this in other videos, so I'm not really gonna go into depth about that here, but it does get me thinking a lot about what Marc Webb's original intentions with this movie were. Beyond the studio-mandated moments and villains, it's evident to me that Marc Webb really wanted to tell a story about Peter Parker battling against time. And it is evident to me that they really tried to find ways to make the theme of time intrinsic to everybody's perspective and story in this movie, even where it does start to feel perhaps a little bit on the nose, such as the Times Square battle, or in places where Peter just simply isn't aware of it, such as the final Electro battle with the planes and the hospital patients. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is conflicted between being this popcorn blockbuster action movie with lots of villains for the comic book nerds to be happy about, and a story about a man that's just like you or me that is having to make big life decisions with very little time to do so, and a clock that just won't stop ticking. And honestly, what I think here is I would love to see a Marc Webb film, not a Spider-Man film, but a Marc Webb film that has this overall theme and this overall narrative through line. Because this film does prove that Marc Webb can do a really nice job with portraying time as an entity in certain isolated sequences and scenes. It's just a shame that the movie and narrative that needs to service that theme just doesn't live up to it, and lacks some really needed attention to detail. In my opinion, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is ultimately a bad movie. The lapses in logic and character come so thick and fast, the pacing definitely buckles under the weight of the many different narratives at play, and it feels like a lot of the different perspectives have been cannibalized to service that theme of time, as opposed to them actually servicing it in a way that feels organic. And that's the problem with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, is that the sound of the cogs and gears of time are drowned out by the sound of the cogs and gears of the studio mechanism, which is actively fighting against the ideas and the creative vision of director Marc Webb. I'm going to say it again, in my eyes, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a bad movie. However, it does showcase some great examples of what Marc Webb is capable of doing. And you can see a clear distinction between what Sony as a studio wanted and what Marc Webb wanted to do as well. Now, I get the feeling that for some, maybe it's Marc Webb's story about Peter Parker going up against time that may shine through ultimately in this film. Maybe they can see that more than they can see the studio-mandated desperation for relevance. Maybe it's the theme of time that rings the loudest for them. But unfortunately, I find it very difficult to see through the white noise that comes with this movie, which in many ways makes it so much worse, because there's a lot here that on paper could make for a really great, really profound Spider-Man story. But I guess that in the case of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, unfortunately, it simply wasn't meant to be. Well, now I hand it over to you, fellow home dogs. What do you guys think? And if you did enjoy this video, might I ask you a favor? Please hit subscribe and that notification bell as your way of telling YouTube keep it coming. Likes are also highly appreciated. Now, I'm always trying to make my content better and more consistent, but this does come at a financial cost. And ad revenue isn't always going to cover putting a roof over my head and covering the subscription fees for the software I use to make these videos. So if you really enjoy this content and you feel like lending me a hand by any chance, I would be so grateful if you would consider joining my Patreon, which will also give you access to the Channel Pup official Discord server. I also have a written blog called Dr. Blogtopus over on channelpup.net. That is where I put my more critical and analytical stuff. And in the description below are links to different social media platforms where you're more than welcome to come and interact with me. So that's it for today, fellow home dogs. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on another video.